There we go. Good evening and welcome to tonight's panel discussion, Policing in Our Community, recorded on Wednesday, March 10th, 2021. This recording will be available on each of the area cable stations and/or their YouTube channels. The link to the recording will also be sent to those who registered for the webinar, and you can feel free to share that out. I'm Joanne Berry, panel moderator for the League of Women Voters of the Acton area. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that supports policies, not candidates or political parties, through civic education and advocacy at a local, state, and national level. We welcome new members and invite you to check out our website for more information at www.lwv-aa.org. The LWV Acton area serves and has members from Acton, Boxborough, Littleton, Maynard, and Stow. Thus, the choice of our police chiefs to invite to tonight's forum. So thank you for joining us. This is a Zoom webinar, so you'll only see the panel and moderator. Note that there are separate icons at the bottom of your screen for Q&A and for chat. We welcome your questions in the Q&A and we'll be posting resources in the chat. Please don't use the chat for questions. This is the third and final of our winter-spring series of panel discussions. We previously covered the Patchwork Public Health Network in the area and plastics, recycle, reuse, refuse, which is available on YouTube. This is not the first time we've invited the area chiefs to participate in this type of forum. Tonight's forum will not cover everything about policing in our communities. We do have a limited time and the format is constrained by the need to conduct it on Zoom. This forum is only one part of what we hope will be an ongoing discussion in our communities that will use many formats and styles and include different speakers and audiences hosted by the diverse organizations in our towns. No one event can be everything that everyone wants. I encourage you to listen and seek additional opportunities to learn and share. The League of Women Voters will do the same. Tonight's panel includes the chiefs of police in our area towns. Chief Richard Burrows of Acton, and if I point, it's not going to matter because everyone's going to be in a different place on your screens. Chief Richard Burrows of Acton, Chief Matthew Maynard of Littleton, Chief Michael Noble of Maynard, and Chief Michael Celisi of Stow. Chief Warren Ryder of Boxborough had a prior commitment, but he has submitted a statement that I'll read in a moment. Before we get started, I want to address the concerns expressed that the language in the publicity flyer indicated league bias toward supporting the police over Black Lives Matter or racial justice. This language is not intended in that manner, but rather to invite consideration of what it takes to be a police officer or police department in our communities and ways residents can work in collaboration with local police departments to move the needle forward on the Black Lives Matter racial justice challenges we face. They do not need to be mutually exclusive. Many questions were submitted from the community and cover many topics. Thank you to all who sent questions. There is not enough time to get to all of the questions, but we'll try to cover the areas where the most interest was expressed. If you are watching live, you may submit questions through the Q&A and we'll get to some of those as well. Each of our panelists will start with a 2-minute introduction and then we'll move to the questions. We'll want to hear from each of the panelists and we'll try to keep a conversational flow. We have a little over an hour and when we're near that mark, we'll close with any final thoughts and perhaps you want to circle back or answer a question that you wanted to answer. The main topic areas based on the questions submitted from the community members will be racial justice, DEI, police accountability, recruitment and training, and mental health. There were other questions in different areas, but those were the ones where we got the most. I'll ask a series of questions and then we'll spend some time in that topic area. Since there were many questions submitted, some have been combined or edited for clarity to get to as many as possible. So once again, if you do have a question, put it in the Q&A and use the chat. It is open for attendees to discuss among themselves. Please remember to keep the conversation civil and productive. All right, so Chief Celisi, I'll give you the first start to introduce yourself, and I think when we're not speaking, we should probably have ourselves on mute to keep the random noises out.
Well, thank you very much for having me tonight. My name is Michael Celisi, and I've been the police chief of Stow for about 2 months now, so I'm new in this role. But I'm very excited to continue my police public safety career. I've been a police officer for a full-time officer for over 16 years now, and about 20 years plus that, including my part-time experience. I've seen policing change over the past 20 years, and I'm excited to see where we're going to go from here. And we're going to be able to make some good changes, some thoughtful changes in policing to ensure that everybody is heard and that we can treat people fairly. So I'm excited that we're here tonight and that we're able to discuss what people want to hear. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Chief Noble.
Good evening. Thank you for having me also. My name is Michael Noble. I'm the Chief of Police of Maynard. I've been the chief here since 2019, and I've been on the Maynard Police Department since 1994. The mission of the Maynard Police Department is to efficiently provide quality police services to our community by promoting a safe environment with an emphasis on treating everyone with trust, integrity, and fairness and professionalism. We've been an accredited department since 2015, and with that comes that we have to constantly update our policies, constantly check what we're doing, and provide the best police practices. I believe in community policing in Maynard, and I encourage the officers to get out of their cars and go into the community and talk to people. It's the only way you'll find out what's going on. COVID's made that difficult recently, where they can't get out. I think that exacerbates some of the miscommunications that go on also. Some of the things we've done since COVID is we have to think out of the box. We've created, at first, we picked up essentials for seniors and high-risk people. Lately, we've been giving seniors and high-risk people rides to their vaccination appointments. Again, we're in the service business, and we have to continue with that. Massachusetts has always been ahead of the curve with policing and training. Over 5 years ago, the towns that you see before you knew there was an opioid crisis and mental health issues that were going on. Knew that the police, although we may be able to respond and quell services immediately, it wasn't a criminal justice issue. It was a medical issue. At that time, we formed a coalition and started a jail diversion program that we have a social worker and coordinator that instead of putting them in the criminal justice system, they actually go and get services that are needed to help them with the substance abuse and mental health issues. A few years back, we had met with a coalition in Maynard that had immigrant issues and what the police do. There were some misconceptions over that, and myself and the former chief, we thought of what can we do, and we created what's called the Human Relations Committee, where people can come and have a forum and a mechanism to talk about those things. Within that committee, we created an immigration policy that both kept the town safe and all parties could agree on. We're always thinking of what we can do better, and we will continue to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Chief Maynard.
Good evening, and thank you for letting me be part of this dialogue tonight. I greatly appreciate it. I've been the chief in Littleton now for 3 years. Been a cop since 1994. When I was thinking about this before we started, I was like, where are we going to begin tonight and where are we going to end tonight? And I think this is the beginning and an opening to the door for a dialogue for us to actually talk about police reform, us to be able to talk about diversity. This is a great forum that you've put together tonight. And when we started in 1994, policing is completely different today. We are not just the officers going out there and fighting bad guys anymore. We are more of a community service agency where we're dealing with mental health, we're dealing with mental illnesses, we're dealing with domestic violence, we're dealing with the opioid crisis. We're not just bringing these people to jail anymore. We're doing restorative justice and restorative practices. The zero tolerance policy and model that we had back in 1990s obviously didn't work. So it's time for us to start something new. And Joanne, I thank you for being the moderator tonight, and John, thank you for hosting this to open this dialogue up for us and to start talking a little more. So thank you. I look forward to the questions tonight, and I will answer them openly and honestly the best I can. And please understand that I'm only human, and I'll do everything I can to make sure you guys hear what I have to say.
Thank you. Chief Burrows.
Good evening. I'm the senior citizen of this group. I started back in the 80s. I've been the chief of police in Acton since 2017. I've seen a lot of changes in police work, as Matt mentioned, from the 80s through the 90s, 2000s. And I've always been looking to make the changes that we need to do to improve our services to our community. Whether that was active shooter training back in the late 90s, early 2000s, community policing reforms we did a few years ago, juvenile justice reforms we did just a couple of years ago, through the jail diversion program that Michael mentioned. The jail diversion program we share is Acton and Bedford, Concord, Carlisle, Lexington, Lincoln, Maynard, and Stow. And I look forward to having this opportunity tonight to answer questions, and I look forward, and thank you very much for letting me be part of this.
I will just read Chief Ryder's statement. Of course, he submitted this, I think, a week or so ago and was unable to attend tonight. So he says, "Thank you for reaching out with the invitation for this meeting, and I'm sorry I cannot attend. Your offer of support is uplifting and is reassuring to see that there is a community concern and awareness of the pressures police are facing. Events that have occurred thousands of miles away have certainly impacted us here locally. I am confident that the chiefs in attendance here tonight would agree that our police agencies take pride in our delivery of professional community service, and that the Northeast has a reputation for having highly educated police that are usually on the forefront of emerging trends and the needs of the populations we serve. Prior to these national events, our police agencies were already involved in training and delivery of services such as anti-bias, fair and impartial policing, mental health first aid, and addiction recovery, just to name a few. A tremendous burden has been placed on our shoulders as we have been cast in a negative light with a broad stroke of the brush. In the past few years, we have seen a rapid decline in recruitment that can be attributed to the constant criticism the profession receives. The Boxborough Police Department was presented with great challenges created by COVID-19. As a different approach policing took light in response to these challenges in order to serve our traditional public safety function. Traditional law enforcement practices such as stops, searches, and arrests create a substantial risk of infection for police, suspect, and community members alike. While a large portion of the population was able to isolate and avoid unnecessary contact, our police never stopped coming to work and caring for our communities. This caused strain for many law enforcement families, as we did not know when or if we could bring this disease into our homes from work. Both of these events have created stress on an already stressful occupation. I'm very concerned for the future of this profession, as we are seeing a rise in police retirements and without new incoming recruits excited to face the challenges of the job." Okay, so like I said, we got a lot of questions, and clearly racial justice and diversity, equity, and inclusion were very common topics. So what I'll do is pose a series of questions, and we'll have a conversation for the next 12, 15 minutes on this topic. So, I mean, this isn't town meeting. I'm not going to cut you off, but hopefully everybody will have a chance to add something to it. So, racial justice and diversity, equity, and inclusion are concerns for many people in the area. I want to acknowledge this panel includes only police chiefs and their perspectives and not others from the community. As I noted earlier, please let us not think this is all there is and let us continue the conversation moving forward. There are questions about broader policy and practices and questions focused on residents' everyday concerns. First, when you start responding, how closely do the police forces mirror the racial diversity of our towns? Then, what are your challenges with racial justice and DEI? So that's a question. Next, there is concern about the punishment for crimes allowing slavery as included in the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, as well as the possibility of someone who was arrested ended up being detained indefinitely due to immigrant status. How do you as local police deal with that? And actually, in the words of the questioner, it was, how have you made peace with being part of that system? Finally, there are people who have had the police called on them for doing ordinary things, like gathering with friends or walking in a quiet neighborhood. Race is sometimes a factor. What can be done to discourage these harassing and frivolous calls? Do you always send officers out? Is there any repercussion for the caller? What is your department doing to reduce the fear that Black people who live and work in our towns may have of the police? So is there anyone who would like to jump on that first?
I could speak about what we do about the caller for. So that was a concern of ours here in Stow, that people call the police, and the officers felt like they had to respond to every call that came in. So back in February, a month ago, I was able to put in a policy in place that stated that basically, the function of the police is to investigate activities that may be predictive of a crime about to occur. So while most police calls report behavior that may be indicative of criminal behavior, other calls occasionally report an individual or individuals who are suspicious merely because they are unfamiliar to the particular area or neighborhood. Reports of this may be driven by implicit bias or actual bias and may have an adverse impact or on marginalized communities, particularly those who are Black or Latinx. On the one hand, Stow Police Department must investigate suspicious behavior and encourage people to report it. But on the other hand, we have to be careful not to contribute to those affected on the communities who have repeated encounters with the police merely because of people's unconscious or actual bias. This policy I'm reading from is actually on our website. So if anyone wants to go onto the Stow Police website, you'll see our policies and procedures online. But when a dispatcher does receive a call concerning an alleged suspicious person or persons, the dispatcher will assign an officer or officers to investigate, but the dispatcher will continue to question the caller about the perceived behavior of the individual and gather specific suspicious behaviors. If the dispatcher ascertains that the callers are reporting someone in their neighborhood who is unknown to them, the dispatcher will inform the officers of the report, and the officers will have the discretion to determine whether or not to respond to these reports where the report of the person is not behavior-based. So, and nothing in my directive shall prevent the officers from responding to calls and speaking directly with the caller to further investigate the caller's observations. So officers can continue to investigate all behavior-based reports. So they're given the option and the discretion to either to respond and talk to the caller, or if they feel that it's just a biased call, then not to respond at all.
Thank you. Chief Burrows, go ahead.
Yes, for the immigration question, I'd like to take a shot at that. We had a policy a few years back when immigration was front and center on the news, and it was a several-page policy. And we had some feedback that people wanted to talk about that policy and make some changes to it. So we ended up meeting with a group of local ACLU members in Acton. I always thought ACLU was a bunch of lawyers somewhere, but apparently there's local people that can be part of the ACLU. So we met with them, and we met with a group that wanted to make Acton a sanctuary city separately. And then we ended up meeting with them together, and they proposed a 2-page policy that Brookline Police Department was using at the time. So I think we made a slight modification to it, and we, went from a 7-page policy to 2-page policy. And it was a great policy because it basically codified what we've been doing for many years, and that is we don't ask people what their immigration status is. If we're stopping somebody and there's a license issue in question and they're from another country, they're allowed to drive in the country for a certain period of time. So at that point, they would show us a passport potentially, but it's not something we typically ask for or cared about, to be honest with you. And the civil detainers that were issued by the Immigration Customs Enforcement, we were not holding people on those. If we had somebody and Immigration and Custom told us, hey, we're interested in that person, we'd let them know they're either going to get bailed sometime tonight or they're going to be in court tomorrow, but we're not going to hold them. We're going to process them on our charges like we normally do and make no changes to it. And shortly after we did the policy, I think the following summer, the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts made a decision that we as local law enforcement can't enforce those civil detainers. So that's kind of our history with the immigration. So we don't enforce immigration law. We wouldn't arrest somebody for an immigration violation. We might arrest somebody locally for drunk driving, for operating without a license. They might have an immigration issue, but that's not going to be covered by us or enforced by us in any way, shape, or form.
I can expound on a couple of those subjects too. When we created the Human Relations Committee, the beginning of it was because of immigration. They were worried about this. And the first thing we went over is what we actually do. We have never contacted ICE and never contacted those agencies. However, we have had workings with them. There's been certain people in our community over several years, a handful of times, but there are times we would need to work with them. And I explained that to them. I said, one time we had a kidnapping and it was part of a gang activity. And I go, we do not want other federal agencies just in our town without our knowledge or without our approval, without our help. So we worked out a system where anytime they were to be helped, it has to go through the chief's office. The officers cannot contact ICE, cannot help, cannot do any of those. And both sides came to an agreement. And actually, we did have the ACLU attorney help with the policy, write up our policy. We also have a similar policy as Stow with the people calling for people that might not be this. We actually kick it up to the supervisor on shift to decide whether or not a response is needed. And usually there'll be some kind of follow-up if it's come in and it's just either a racial issue or it's not that, just because they don't think they belong in the neighborhood. Some of the other things that we do too is the Communities for Restorative Justice is one of the things, in our policies, we have what's called alternatives to arrests. What can you do, besides arresting? I remember when I started juvenile arrests, we had so many of them. I think we've had 1 or 2 in the last 3 years. It's just not what we do anymore. There's many alternatives to arrest. And the Communities for Restorative Justice is another one of those pieces that we have gotten away from the arrest thing and try to get the people. And that's a victim-based driven thing. And then the jail diversion program, again, is another part of that where, somebody who has a personal substance abuse issue, we're not looking to arrest them and just put them in. We're looking to get them medical help. Those are many other things that we have done to work on alternatives to arrest and racial issues.
Thank you. Chief Maynard.
Last but not least, right?
Well,
Yeah. Very uncomfortable conversation to bring up slavery and imprisonment. And for me to be talking about, I am only human. But we have to look and we have to recognize the history of our negative interactions that we've had. I mean, hundreds of years ago, we had slave patrols going out there, eating up whole towns. And we need to change that. And as Michael Celisi was saying earlier, the suspicious calls, the only way we can change these calls and the only way we can change the environment that we're living in is to make sure that we educate everybody further. And how are we going to do that? But basically follow up with the caller and make sure they know what is going on. Why did you think that was suspicious? Educate them let them know where we stand and how we are fitting in here. Nothing's going to change until everybody is on the same page, and nothing is going to go forward unless we all have to be able to build that trust together. So there are several different practices, like Michael had said, in regards to restorative justice and different classes that we are attending. But if we don't step up on a basis altogether and talk about this and educate everybody else, then it's never going to move forward.
I'm just looking at the questions in the chat, and I will ask you if, where did it go? That there's interest in learning more about how your departments are addressing systemic racism in the justice system, in the criminal justice system. If you have specific things that you could let us know about. Chief Burrows, go ahead.
So we are one cog in the criminal justice system. We're typically the entryway. From us, it moves on through the court system, and then through institutional corrections, and then through community corrections. So we're at the beginning at the gatekeepers, and that's all we have control over. We can't control over any of the sentencing issues we're hearing about, any of the punishments, any of the incarceration stuff. So at our level, we're focusing on how people come into the criminal justice system. So we're having a new policy, like Mike Celisi was talking about, helps us govern how we respond to issues in our community. And the jail diversion program that we've mentioned a couple times is a clinician assigned to all 8 communities that spends time in each community and follows up on all the issues we have regarding mental health, substance use, and regarding the mental health, we're looking at it, we're training our officers in a couple different ways. Let me go back to 2016. The International Association of Chiefs of Police came up with the One Mind campaign, and they challenged every police department in the world, because it's an international organization, to have a better response to mental health. They challenged every department to have a best practices policy, to partner with a mental health facility, to train every one of their officers in mental health first aid, which is an 8-hour training program, and then 20% of your department in crisis intervention training, which is a 40-hour program. And they recognize that that's a lot of training hours for departments. I'm proud to say today the Acton Police Department has 80% of our officers trained in CIT. And if it wasn't for COVID, we'd have 100%. We're working on the next training class. So our response to historically potentially arresting our way, we have a few tools on our belt. Arrest is one of them. We're training our officers to recognize mental health issues, to try to slow it down, respond accordingly, try to get as much information as we can at the call, and come up with a resolution besides arrest. Work with the families of the individual in question. Same thing with the drugs. We used to arrest people that were around the people. We now have it so that if somebody calls in because somebody's having an overdose, we're not going to charge anybody because of the drugs that are on the location. We just want to get the person help and start services. So that's kind of the larger overreaching way that we are responding to calls in our community. In Acton, our 3 biggest issues are domestic violence, substance use, and mental health. So we've partnered with programs to address all 3 of those issues.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to take that on?
Sure.
Go ahead. Thank you.
In Littleton, we have a community outreach initiative. It's COIN is the acronym. It's based out of Pepperell Air District Court. So again, what we try to do is try to defer to them someone that's in need, whether it's mental health, drug or alcohol abuse. They have a clinician on staff that reaches out to them to see if they can actually get them to the resources that they actually need, rather than, okay, this person's drunk on the common, We arrest them, we bring them to jail. This zero tolerance policy that we had in the 90s and in 2000 obviously didn't work. So we need to think of a different option for us. And, Chief Burrows said that it's another tool in our belt for us to use. I spent 2 weeks ago a forum for 2 days in regards to restorative justice with the University of Vermont. And we had a breakout sessions, and you're able to listen to the different forms of people in academia and where they're using restorative practices. It's quite obvious that the criminal justice system, the way it sits right now, is not working. And in 1995, we were arresting people for a joint, and now marijuana is legal. Where do we stand? How are we going to move forward to make sure that this is legalized, that it's actually working properly? So restorative practices is one option for us.
Can I add on to that?
Yes, please go ahead.
So we've been talking about the jail diversion, and I know in Stow here, I am currently trying to work on a grant to hire a co-response clinician. So it will be a full-time share between myself and Boxborough, where the co-response clinician would be in the cruiser with the officers and taken to calls for service and be on scene for that person to intervene right then and there. And I do have a policy in place where if there is a mental health call and the officers do need a clinician, there is the advocate service will be on scene at the request of the officer within 1 hour of us requesting them to be there. So we are using more resources as we can get people help. We are trying to, like I said, I am trying to get a grant to get that person here 40 hours a week just to be shared between the two towns. So that is something that is in the works right now.
I could touch on, a few years ago, I taught one of the procedural justice classes at the academy. And with that is the implicit bias that people have. I think where we created the Human Relations Committee helps a lot, where you don't know the perception that sometimes we give as police officers, and how the public and some of the minority community in the public sees that. So to bring in the forum where we can discuss it in a rational manner, and where it can bring to light some of the things that we don't know about, and actually the other way too is that we can explain why a certain response might have been, or that we didn't know that was part of the community. I think that's the biggest part that we have to start doing, is just like you said, this forum and talking about it. And I think that's really helped bring a mechanism to where if there is an issue between the police and the community, that they can bring it to that forum and it will be discussed and hopefully addressed.
So before we move on to the next topic, let me just ask, this is a quick response. In your departments, in each town's departments, how reflective is your population of the population of the community? In other words, minority, what's your percentage of minority officers and women officers? Chief Kennard.
Sure. Well, first of all, we fully embrace diversity within the department, and makeup of our department is well over 33% to 40% diverse, and that's in all aspects. Part of the LGBTQ family is within our department. My most recent hire is one of the greatest guys I ever have. He speaks Somali. And he's an immigrant he migrated when he was 16 years old from Kenya, and legally with his parents. And he was in Portland, went on to college. He has his master's degree, and he's probably in my last 3 years one of my best hires that I've had. opening my eyes up quite a bit. But yeah, the department in itself is probably 33 to 40% diverse.
And how many women do you have on your force?
Including dispatch, I believe we have 6.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chief Celisi?
So currently we have 8 officers and 1 female officer. That makes up, and the rest are white males. Currently, we are actively recruiting for 2 police officers. Since taking over, I have changed how we do that recruiting. In the past, it was limited to people who had a college education and were academy trained. That is, when you start excluding people from the opportunity to get a job, then it's not right. So I've had the support of the town to get rid of the requirement of having an academy and having a degree. We pay for people to get their degree. We'll pay for someone to go to the academy. So one of the things that I've done is put together a hiring committee made up of 3 department members and 2 residents, one from our Neshoba Area Social Justice Alliance and an older resident. And we're doing blind resumes. So when they come in, they get to the hiring committee without names or personal information, just their resume of what they present and their cover letter and what they've done. So the first time that our hiring committee is going to see this individual is when they walk through the door for the interview. We used to get around 8 or 9 people applying for the job here, and I have up to 35 people who've applied for the job. And we're open for another week, and I encourage more people to apply because I'm willing to send someone to the academy. We have there is a provision in the contract for officers to get reimbursed for college education. So if we're going to make the investment, why can't we make the investment in our community and somebody to help further them along? And I never liked, like I said, I've just been in this position for a couple of months now, but I've been with the department for years, and I never liked the idea that we were limiting our availability of talent. And I've seen applications come in from all over the place. So it's really exciting to be part of that.
Thank you. Chief Noble?
Most of our officers are white. We have now had more females hired and now as officers than we've ever had. My last 3 hires were all female. I promoted a female who was the first sergeant that we've ever had that's female. Our dispatch is also 4. So there's 8 female employees, not including civilian staff that are on. I would like to. There's certain drawbacks in hiring in the communities that we live in. Some of them being that there's a Massachusetts statute that the officers have to live within 15 miles of the town that they work in. That draws. This is a very affluent area of the state, and that limits the pool. We were civil service up until 2016. That limits it too, because residency requirements, and Maynard is 94% white. So you have to hire the residents prior to that. So there are limitations. I have been asking that same question: how do we get a more diverse? How do we get more diversity? And I've spoken to our state rep, Kate Hogan, about this, and they have put committees together, and that is part of the police reform. How do we get more minority candidates to apply for police? So again, in this type of forum, I don't have all the answers, and I would actually love to hear what some people have to say.
Thank you. Chief Burrows?
Yes, since coming out of civil service back in 2015, we've been able to increase our diversity. We hired our first Black police officer. So he represents 2% of our department, and we have 2% Black population in Acton. Where we lack is we have over 20% Asian population, and we don't have any Asian officers at this time. We have 3 female officers.
Thank you.
Also, just to continue, we are, I would like to see more, females obviously apply. And we never had a pregnancy related policy before. So that was something that has been put in place. And it deals with making accommodations as the law requires, but also, letting everyone know if you come here and you want to start a family, this is how we'll accommodate you. So I think hopefully that will attract more people to come to our departments.
Thank you. So let's move on. The next major topic area, police accountability. So that is a major concern. First, could each of you tell who you report to as chief? Then these different areas. What is the process for performance reviews for officers, and how do you address misconduct or other concerns about an officer? Do you use dash and body cameras? And if so, what is your policy for releasing video of incidents related to complaints against officers? Are officers expected to hold colleagues accountable, or is it more likely that a code of silence is tolerated? If one of your officers used the N-word and you were either present to hear it being used or received a report that it was used and it was verifiable, what measures would you take as the police chief to ensure accountability for the use of that term to describe Black people? Another question, after the January 6th insurrection, it has become well known that white supremacists are present in police departments. I don't think anyone's saying that they know anything, just that it's a thing. What specifically are your departments doing to vet current and future officers for racist hate speech, cult affiliations such as QAnon, and ties to violent racial groups? And there is a question that we got tonight about your position on qualified immunity, which of course everyone is concerned about. So is there anyone who wants to dive in first? And you're thinking, so.
I can
Okay,
start.
go ahead, Chief Noble.
The accountability things, again, as an accredited department, we have to have certain standards and certain things. Every citizen complaint, whether anonymous or written or phoned in or whatever, gets investigated. There's a certain procedure that has to be followed. That certain procedures. The new police reform expands on that, where all of those complaints will go into a central database. That'll be this. There is laws in case law that if somebody is under discipline or whatever, they have to, and it's an untruthful or that, they go onto what's called the Brady list, and they have to be told by any defense attorney or any criminal action that they were a part of, that they have been found untruthful in some investigation. And there's several other layers that we hold the officer accountable. If any of my officers ever use they'd be terminated. As simple as that. In this day and age, if you don't know better than that, then you shouldn't be an officer in this area. As I said before, the level of standards that we have for accreditation requires us to go through the statistics of each officer. So there will be, like, if there's any bias against any certain thing, it should be shown during that audit, and that's an annual audit that we have to go through. And again, the reform, I can't remember every one of the questions, but the reform does help with a lot of that protocol. As with qualified immunity is a very difficult subject to understand. I'm an attorney, and it's not completely profound. So to just eliminate it without knowing what the repercussions would be, that's why I agree with what the reform is they're putting together, a study of what qualified immunity and how it could be either changed or reformed to be better served. But to just quickly eliminate it without studying it, yeah, I didn't agree with.
Thank you. Chief Maynard.
Sure. Well, you talked about accountability and who I report to or who the chiefs actually report to. And I think most of the chiefs report directly to their board of selectmen. Some report to their town manager. Here in Littleton, it's kind of unique that I report directly to the selectmen, and day-to-day operations I discuss, and I'm on the same level playing field as the town administrator. But I think every chief on this panel will agree with me. We're held accountable by the community that we live in and work in. And it's up to them to let us know how we are doing. And, you know, I have an open door policy here in my department, and I have residents, non-residents, business owners, monthly meetings that I'm not afraid to ask them, hey, how are we doing? And they're not afraid to give the feedback and tell us the real thing. So I think, you know, part of the accountability part is that within itself. As for performance reviews for police officers, we have monthly staff meetings. That's the the 5 sergeants, dispatch supervisor, deputy chief, and myself. And every sergeant and dispatch supervisor has to report to me and the deputy as to how their officers are doing and what they're doing and what new roles they're taking on and what initiatives they're starting, where we can improve, how we can get them to improve. Today was more of a motivational meeting within itself as to how do we motivate our officers to be out there more in the public. And COVID's put a lot of restrictions on us, like we said earlier, but at the end of the day, we're still police officers, and we have to come up with new methods and theories to move on and move forward. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Chief Celisi.
Yeah, so for me, I am held accountable to, as Chief Maynard said, to the community, but my direct supervisors would be the Board of Selectmen reporting through the town administrator. I do have a set of standards that I have to meet that does get reviewed, even though it just started 2 months ago. And to mimic what Chief Noble said, that if any one of my officers was making comments like that or using the N-word, they would be fired. And also beyond that, what we would do here is we would report that or any complaint of any bias-based policing to post and the divisions of police standards within 2 days. And then they can conduct an independent investigation into what happened. And it won't be just our police department looking at our own officers. So that is an additional thing that we would be what we would be doing here. And I'm sorry, I forgot what was there was one more thing in there.
Oh, the qualified immunity.
No, wasn't that one.
Performance reviews. Oh, the dash and body camera.
So as far as the performance reviews go, so years ago we were always, when I first started, it was how many tickets did you write, how many car stops did you make. That metrics doesn't work. I want to know how many people have you helped today. That's what I'm looking at my officers for, and that's what I want to be judging them on, is how many people did they help today and what did that look like. So that's something that we're looking at for our evaluations going forward. We're in a great change here, especially in Stow, and that is one of the changes I want to make on the metrics on how the officers are evaluated.
Thank you. Chief Burrows.
Yes, thank you. I answer to the town manager, John Mangiarotti. The performance reviews, we do one each year on every member of the department. It's conducted by their immediate supervisor, and then it gets approved and reviewed by the division commander, then to the deputy chief, then myself, and it goes up to human resources. We talk to the sergeants ahead of time. We talk about how we do the performance reviews. A lot of times we take the officer's sick time for the year. We review their motor vehicle stops, their activities, to help them have a meaningful discussion about how they're doing and set goals for the upcoming year. It's a pretty good process. It's been in place for a while. We've made a couple changes to it over the past couple of years with certification and accreditation. But I think it's a good tool to give the officer some timely feedback. But that's the yearly big review. And then we try to ask the sergeants to kind of check in with them a couple times during the year. we do quarterly staff meetings with the sergeants. It's a great opportunity to kind of talk about, where the department's moving, what's going on in the community, what we're seeing for trends and patterns, and how we can best address those concerns.
Just to follow up on, in the performance reviews, we do something similar in the same way, that it's to start the discussion with the sergeant over what the sergeant wants or expectations, and the expectations of the officer to the sergeant. We don't require any amount of stops or this or that. I have some officers that don't make many stops, but they're always at the ballpark. They're always going there. Again, with COVID, that has limited. As for body cameras, Massachusetts is a unique state where we're what's called a two-party state in recording people. And there's statutory wiretap statute, I think it's 272/99, but it requires that you have to give notification that another party's being recorded. So there are some statutory hoops that have to be changed for body cam. That's why you're seeing them around the country more prevalent, but you haven't seen them in mass because there are some legal loopholes that you have to jump through. There's also public records issues that if people request the body camera from there, what do you have to give them? And it because of those other statutes, you would have to watch that because of privacy rights, you would have to watch minute for minute. And if somebody requested a week's worth of body camera from one officer, that would take that. That's why the legislature has taken up the question. And again, that is part of the reform to how can we change it to make it. And then they're going to come up with uniform policy for the state. I do believe we will have them, soon, but for us to get them and try to implement a policy where it could be changed to state at this time, and the cost is not effective right now.
Okay, thank you. Did you have something else to add?
We keep going, referring back to policy and procedure, and that's all well and good, but honestly, an agency is driven by the culture of the agency is driven by its behavior, and we can't tolerate any poor behavior. We need to have that trust within our department, and that'll spill out into the community. And as far as cameras, if we need cameras to look over our shoulders and to document everything, that means we don't have the trust of the community. So that means we have to build that trust back up before we actually implement cameras. Just a thought.
Thank you. So I do want to double back on a topic. Quite a few questions have come up regarding the diversion programs. A few of you have mentioned it, but I think people really want to know a little bit more about that. So any diversion programs that you have in each town, if you could just explain how that works.
I could talk about that if you want.
Sure.
So in Littleton, we have C4RJ. I believe Maynard and Stow has it as well as Acton. So I think Concord was the start of this whole restorative justice practice, C4RJ. And we tried implementing it. I'm going back 15 to 16 years ago here in Littleton, and we were told no. At that point in time, the DAs wanted to have control over every kind of criminal case that went on. So we started slowly with small juvenile offenses that we kept from going to court and filing the complaint. What happens in a community if there's a small crime or even a big crime is there's a tear in the system and it needs to be mended. And the only way we're going to mend and heal is if we all come together. Several times you have a case where a victim has to go to court and the case will get pushed off. And then the victim has to take another day off to go to court and the case gets pushed off again. Next thing you know, you have a case that's been to court 3 or 4 times and there's no resolution. And the victim gets frustrated, throws their hands up in the air and says, forget it, I'm all done. With restorative justice, it brings the offender and the victim together in the same room with the officer and the facilitator, and they have to sit across from each other. Unlike a court setting where a defendant has to sit with their attorney, and the attorney does all the talking for them, the offender is actually made to face the victim and discuss and mend those wrongs and make them right. So most of our referrals are before the court system. However, if you can recall, in Littleton, we had the bus fires probably 7 years ago now, 88 years ago now, where some kids were messing around with fireworks and ended up torching 3 buses on the bus lot. That did go to court, and part of the agreement was that they had to all complete C4RJ, and it was very moving. We had people from the community that were sat on the panel in the circle, and it really and truly did mend the wrongs and brought everything into a circle as everybody could talk.
Thank you.
I think also the jail diversion program that we have, that the community share with the clinician that follows up. I think some people misconstrue the defund the police is a lot more to put it into social services. Again, the communities realized that 5 years ago that there's some things that are out of our training. We're not trained for that. We can quiet disturbance and everything, but if somebody has mental health issues, they need real medical help. That's beyond our training. They also substance abuse. As Matt has said many a times, back in the 90s, yeah, that person got locked up. That's it. Locked up, processed, brought to court. That's not what we're doing anymore. That's what it's called, jail diversion. You're not bringing them to the jail. You're bringing them to the hospital. You're getting them the medical help they need. You're not going there as a drug investigation. You're going there as the community caretaker to take care of the people. I had my select board ask me, well, is there any way if they get overloaded, how are we going to handle it? Well, they should be funded. That's such an important thing. I've seen it, because I've been on a long time in Maynard, and we've had a mental health issue. We have a lot of homes in town that have had this, and they've had domestics. I mean, we had one today. It was a domestic. We didn't arrest him. We took him because he had mental health issues. We took him to the hospital. It's a much different approach that we take than it is this. And now our clinician will follow up with that person after, they get released from the hospital or actually when they're at the hospital.
Thank you. Chief Burrows, anything to add there?
Yes, I believe today there's more seriously mentally ill people in jails than there are in institutions. And over the years, the police response has been to arrest and let the courts deal with it. So this jail diversion program, like Michael just mentioned, we had a domestic in Maynard, and what typically 10 years ago would have been an arrest and brought to the court and maybe try to address some of the issues. We recognize what happened and we bring that person down for treatment. And that's the best way to handle that. And the officer's training and understanding of the situation, what happened, and not placing that person in custody is the whole diversion piece of it.
Thank you. Anything, Chief Celisi, did you have any additional thoughts there?
So just for the Communities for Restorative Justice, I remember going with Matt to the State House years ago to try to get this program going, not just in our community, but throughout the state. And now it is definitely taken off throughout our community and county, which is incredible. In Stow, we've actually used it for adults as well as juveniles. So it's not just for a juvenile program. And I was involved in one of the cases for an adult, and it was a very eye-opening experience that the harm that could be restored was so much better in that setting than it was for a court. And the victim of that case had so much more control over the way their life was continuing on. So it's one of our greater partnerships that we have, or one of our police partnerships that we have with the community. So.
Okay, thank you. So we have about 15 minutes left. And there's a ton of questions in the chat, in the Q&A, and I do want to acknowledge that I see them, and there's absolutely no way we can get through all of them. we'll save them and perhaps forward them on, get them, somehow try to continue the conversation with these questions. You've touched on, we've talked about a bunch of different things. I know one of the things that folks are interested in are recruitment and training, and some of you have touched a little bit on how officers are recruited and what train. So people are interested in what training is required and what you're looking for looking for moving forward, what you'll be doing for training. And there was questions about whether or not you would consider an auxiliary program in your, specifically it was Stow, but I think it could apply to anything. And you have pretty much addressed most of the mental health questions that folks asked, but there is one about how do officers, how are you taking care of yourselves in the job-related stress? I think all of us can agree that your jobs have always been difficult and just get more difficult all the time. So if you could, kind of address that recruitment, how you're looking to fill gaps in your force, and how you're training and taking care of yourselves. And I will be right up front and say there's a ton more questions, all great. We're just not going to get to them. Go ahead, Chief Burrows. Yeah.
Yes, we were very fortunate to be chosen by the Puppies Behind Bars program last year, and we're able to send Detective John Stackhouse out to be partnered with a lab, Golden Lab, and it's a fully trained service dog. And we were just about ready to kick off the program, and he got out to quite a few places, and then COVID hit. So as soon as we start lifting restrictions, he's going to be back out there again. And the program was originally designed for veterans, and then after 9/11, they focused on police officers, and then after Sandy Hook, they focused on communities. So this dog isn't servicing anything for John himself, but he's more of a service dog, but he has to be assigned to somebody, and it's for the greater community. So the plan is to bring him to all different events in town, but it's also for our police officers and firefighters for the daily stresses of the job. We do critical incident stress debriefings after what we consider to be critical events, but there's a lot of events that happen that we might not think of as a critical event, but as a father of a 13-year-old daughter, you might go to a call that really hits you to your core. Or you as a father of an 8-year-old boy go to a call and it hits you. It might not hit anybody else, but it might hit you based on having a child about that age. So after we did a couple of the stress debriefings for the major events, we asked the team to come out, and they actually made presentations to all the firefighters and all the police officers in our communities to kind of talk about the resources they offer. And it's confidential resources. They can just go talk to somebody. One of them lives right in town. You can just pop by his house. He's not going to write a report. He's not going to tell anybody you came by, but talk to you and help you work through whatever you're going through. And I didn't realize how much of social creatures we are until we stopped doing in-person roll calls, started staggering our shift changes due to COVID restrictions, and the disconnect, even through the Zoom meetings like we talked about, in person, it's a much richer environment. So I'm looking forward to getting past COVID, but those are some of the things we do for our officers in dealing with the stress of the job.
Yeah. Chief Noble, go ahead.
Yeah, we have an employee assistance program that's anonymous that we use at our monthly staff meetings. The supervisors give a report on how their officers are. At least once a month to be asking them how they're feeling, any issues, any of that. Right now, we have a relatively young department, and the supervisors, most of them are newer supervisors. So it's much easier for them to connect with each other. So if something's going on, they bring it to the attention. And then if there's any critical incidents like that, we have crisis teams there. It's a mandatory thing that they have to go to after a critical incident for any of that. As for hiring and training, I know I heard it before, that the culture of the department. Well, the culture starts at the top. If we don't set the right culture, the best training in the world isn't going to matter if we don't have the right culture. So you have to have that culture in there. We take several trainings. There's mandatory trainings that every officer has to take and master. I can speak because I know I see other officers and other chiefs we go far beyond what's required in that. And we take the ICAT training, that was the Integrating Communication Assessment and Tactics training, which is de-escalation. That we've taken several other type of de-escalation, but it's basically slow the incident down. You don't have to rush in. You don't have to finish the incident in a heartbeat. Several other trainings, implicit bias, as I said before, racial justice trainings, fair and impartial policing. There's numerous trainings that I'm very wholeheartedly for and completely keep asking for more money in training. As for hiring, it's always been my thing that you hire for personality and character, and not for the biggest person or the strongest or the fastest or this or that. You can't, you can teach people to be police officers, but you can't teach them to be good people. So you look for that, and that makes it easier, because those officers aren't going to be the ones that are getting in trouble.
Thank you. Chief Maynard.
Yeah, we have all the stress managements at our disposal as well. But I think what it comes down to is we quite often overthink a lot of the issues. And I think it comes down to individual interactions with our citizens, and to make sure that they're actually satisfied with what we're doing and we're hearing what they want from us. That's going to build the relationship. That's going to lead right to officer wellness in itself. So, relationships.
Thank you. Chief Celisi.
So for our officer wellness, I am looking to the town to hopefully fund some money for, we're calling it training, but what I'm doing is bringing in counselors and clinicians. And we start with really getting the officers to recognize like what stresses we're looking at ourselves. There's a perceived notion that if you are an officer and you ask for help, you could be put on leave and you could lose your job. So I want to take that stigma away, and what I'm doing is having clinicians come in, and it's going to start from the top down. And after the training, the 3-hour training, every officer gets 30 to 45 minutes alone with this person, and they can sit there for a half hour and do nothing, or they can sit there and talk to this individual, and no report comes back to me unless there's a self-harm, an imminent self-harm. But other than that, they get to do this twice, hopefully two times a year, and if not more, if they need it. And we're going to remove that stigma if they do need help, that it doesn't get to a point where they can't ask for help, and I'm sending them to a place where they can get help. And if we have officers that are clear-minded, they're going to be able to treat the community clear and more respectful. So that's the upcoming plan.
Okay, thank you. We are just, I just feel like there's not enough time to address anything else thoughtfully. I do want to thank you all for joining us. The audience, thank you for joining us, even though we can't see you. And thank you to all of the chiefs for joining us tonight and providing us with thoughtful and forthright discussion on many topics. And sadly, we did not get to cover everything, though I think we could do an all-day forum and we might get to stuff, but that not quite what we can manage at this point. So like I said, we'll capture the questions, and hopefully other organizations, the league again, there'll be other opportunities to continue this discussion in each of the towns and in the combination of the towns. So thank you very much for participating, and hope we'll see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
for hosting.
Thank you, Joanne.